I never thought one small decision could change everything. I had been living in my tiny apartment for years, working odd jobs just to pay the bills, barely scraping by, and trying to keep my head above water. Baking had always been my escape, something that made the world pause for a moment while I stirred, kneaded, and watched dough rise. I wasn't a professional, not even close, just a girl with a few simple ingredients and a quiet hope that maybe, somehow, my small creations could bring a little joy. I had no idea that joy would return to me in ways I could never have imagined. That evening, I was walking back from the corner store, carrying a bag of flour, sugar, and butter I had bought on a tight budget, thinking about the old recipe I had learned from my grandmother. I didn't have anyone to bake for, not really. Friends were busy, family was far away, and my life had become this repetitive cycle of work, sleep, and quiet longing. But as I passed the street where the rich part of town began, I noticed him, a man I had seen before, though only in passing, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored suit, walking with purpose, surrounded by an aura of wealth that felt almost unreal. He looked at me, briefly, with something that seemed like recognition, and then continued down the street. I felt a strange pull in my chest, a mixture of curiosity and fear, but I shook it off. What did it matter? He didn't know me. I didn't even know him. Still, the idea formed irrational and impulsive, but impossible to ignore. I would bake a cake for him, not because I wanted anything from him, not because I hoped for a reward, but because something about that moment made me feel alive. I could feel my hands trembling as I rushed back to my small kitchen, a cramped space barely large enough for me to move. The counter was cluttered with unpaid bills, old coffee mugs, and my worn recipe notebook. But I cleared a spot and began. Flour dusted the air in my apron as I measured, whisked, and folded, lost in the rhythmic motion that had always calmed me. The oven warmed the room, the smell of butter and sugar curling around me like a hug I had been missing for years. I worked quickly, carefully, trying not to think about what would happen once the cake was done. Would he even notice? Would he smile politely and walk away? Or worse, would he dismiss it? A laugh at my amateur attempt at baking floating over his polished shoes. I finished just as the sun was setting, the golden light streaming through my kitchen window and catching the soft edges of the cake. I stared at it, the frosting imperfect, a little lopsided, but somehow beautiful in its own quiet way. I packed it carefully into a small box, my heart pounding like it had never pounded before. I carried it down the streets I had walked 1,000 times, each step heavier with anticipation and doubt. What if this was stupid? What if I made a fool of myself? And yet, despite the fear, there was a thrill in every footstep, a secret thrill that maybe, just maybe, I was about to do something remarkable. When I finally reached the building he lived in, my hands shook as I pressed the buzzer, my breath caught in my throat, and I almost turned away, almost let the fear win. But then I reminded myself why I was here. It wasn't about him. It was about me taking a chance, breaking the monotony, and letting a small piece of who I was into the world. The buzzer buzzed, a sharp sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet hallway. The door clicked open, and I stepped inside, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain it echoed for everyone to hear. I found myself staring up at the grand staircase, polished and gleaming, the kind of luxury I had only ever seen in magazines. My small, nervous hands clutched the cake box as I ascended, each step a battle between fear and exhilaration. He met me in the doorway of a room lined with bookshelves, every wall a testament to wealth I had only glimpsed in movies. For a moment, I froze, uncertain if I should speak, hand over the cake, or run. But then he smiled, a quiet, almost imperceptible curl of the lips that made the tension in my shoulders dissolve just a little. "You baked this?" he asked, softly, almost in disbelief. The simplicity of the question, the sincerity behind it, made the air crackle with anticipation. I nodded, words failing me. He took the box gently, almost reverently, as if holding something fragile and precious. The silence stretched, heavy and electric, and I realized that in that small, fleeting moment, the world had shifted. I left soon after, my heart still racing, not knowing what to expect, not knowing if he would even eat it, but feeling as if I had touched something extraordinary, even if only briefly. I walked back through the streets, my mind replaying every second, every glance, every breath. Little did I know, the next day would change everything. The cake I had baked on a whim, for a man I barely knew, had somehow sparked something unexpected, something that would reach far beyond my tiny kitchen, my quiet life, and my small, cautious dreams. By the morning, a line had formed around the block, a line of strangers, all waiting, drawn by a single story, a single act of courage and kindness that had started in the unlikeliest of places. I stood on the corner, watching, heart pounding, unable to comprehend how far one small choice could go. Every face in the crowd, every whisper, every eager hand reaching for a slice of my imperfect cake reminded me that life had a strange way of rewarding bravery, kindness, and the willingness to step into the unknown. And yet, beneath the joy, a strange, almost invisible tension lingered, a question I couldn't shake. How had this simple act reached so many? Who had spread the word? And why did it feel like I was only seeing the beginning of something far larger, far more unpredictable than I had ever imagined? That day, I learned something I hadn't known about myself. I learned that courage isn't always about grand gestures, that bravery can hide in the small, quiet acts we almost dismiss. I learned that life can surprise you when you dare to act, when you step past fear and hesitation. But I also learned that surprises can be dangerous, that the world has a way of twisting even the purest intentions into something unrecognizable. And as I walked back to my apartment that evening, exhausted, exhilarated, and more alive than I had felt in years, I couldn't help but wonder what would tomorrow bring. Who would I meet? What doors would open? And what secrets would be uncovered as a result of a single, impulsive decision to bake a cake for a stranger? It was a quiet night, the city lights flickering like distant stars, and I felt a shiver of anticipation running down my spine. I had no idea, not then, that this one act of kindness would mark the beginning of a journey I could never have predicted, that it would reveal secrets, test loyalties, and challenge everything I thought I knew about life, about people, and about myself. I didn't know it yet, but my life had tilted on its axis, and the world I thought I understood was already shifting beneath my feet, and I had no choice but to step forward, into whatever came next, holding only the fragile, trembling hope that I could survive and, perhaps even thrive in the chaos that was coming. The next morning, I woke to a world that felt completely unrecognizable. My tiny apartment, usually quiet and dim, felt charged with an energy I couldn't explain. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the fog of sleep, but the first thing I saw stopped me cold. My phone was blowing up, messages, notifications, emails, and social media alerts, all flooding in at once. I hadn't realized, not until that moment, how far-reaching one small act could be. The cake I had baked in a burst of impulse, something I thought would matter only for a few seconds in a stranger's life, had somehow captured the attention of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the screen, heart hammering. Part of me wanted to hide, to delete everything, to pretend none of this had happened. But another part, a voice I hadn't heard in years, whispered that maybe this was my moment, the thing I had been waiting for without knowing it. I swallowed, took a deep breath, and began scrolling. Images of my cake, poorly photographed, but somehow perfect in their imperfection, were everywhere. Strangers had taken pictures, shared them online, posted comments about the taste, the smell, the sheer charm of it. And then I saw a photo of the line outside the building, a line of people I didn't know, stretching around the block, waiting for something I had created with my own hands. I couldn't breathe. I sank onto the edge of my bed, my fingers trembling. I had done this. I had made something that mattered. And yet, beneath the pride, a creeping wave of fear began to rise. Who had spread this? How had it gotten so big so fast? And what did it mean for me? Suddenly, the small, quiet world I had built for myself felt fragile, like glass balancing on the edge of a cliff. Every notification felt like another step closer to something I couldn't yet understand. By mid-morning, I realized I had to see it for myself. I grabbed my coat, slipped into my shoes, and walked out into the streets, following the sound of distant voices, laughter, and the unmistakable murmur of curiosity. The line was longer than I had imagined, winding around the corner, and spilling into the next street. People were holding boxes, bags, even handwritten notes, and their faces were alight with excitement, anticipation, and gratitude. I stood frozen for a moment, unsure whether to approach, to step forward, or to run. And then I saw him, the man I had baked the cake for, standing at the front, calm and composed, a small smile tugging at the edges of his mouth as he greeted each person individually.
Shaking hands, nodding, thanking. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. I wanted to understand how this had become real, How a simple, impulsive act of baking had escalated into something so monumental. And yet, despite the chaos, there was a strange sense of order, a rhythm to the way people moved, the way they waited, the way they smiled. It was almost surreal. I felt like I had stepped into a story, one that was both mine and not mine at the same time. A story that had grown beyond my comprehension. As I made my way closer, I noticed whispers following me. "She's the one who baked it," someone said. "That's her," another added, pointing in my direction. I froze, a mix of exhilaration and terror flooding through me. People were looking at me, their faces filled with admiration, curiosity, even reverence. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. I wanted to speak, to explain, to tell them that it had been a simple last-minute decision, that I hadn't meant for any of this to happen. But no words came. All I could do was stand there trembling, as the world seemed to pivot around me. The man approached, his expression unreadable. "You didn't expect this, did you?" he asked softly, almost teasing, though there was a weight behind his words I couldn't place. I shook my head, unable to respond, my voice lost somewhere between fear and disbelief. He smiled faintly, handing me a cup of coffee, a small gesture that somehow grounded me in the middle of the storm. "This isn't just about the cake," he said. "It's about what it represents. And now, everyone wants to see the girl behind it." I wanted to run, to escape the sudden intensity of it all, but something inside me stayed. A quiet courage, a spark I hadn't felt in years, pushed me forward. I nodded, and in that moment, the line of people seemed to dissolve, replaced by a single immense pressure, the weight of expectation, of curiosity, of potential. I realized that my life, my small, ordinary life, had shifted in a way I couldn't have predicted. One act of kindness, one decision made in a quiet kitchen, had opened a door I didn't know existed. And now, there was no going back. As the hours passed, I moved among the people, handing out slices, watching their reactions, listening to their stories. Everyone had a reason for being there, a memory, a longing, a curiosity that had drawn them to me, to the cake I had baked without thinking. Their gratitude was overwhelming, their joy infectious, but beneath it all, I felt a strange, gnawing uncertainty. Why had this escalated so quickly? What would happen when the novelty wore off? And who, among all these strangers, would truly see me? Not just the cake, not just the gesture, but me? By evening, the line had dissipated, the crowd thinned, and I was left standing outside the building, the setting sun casting long shadows across the street. My hands were sticky with frosting, my apron dusted with flour, and my mind was spinning with everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. The man approached again, this time with a notebook in his hand, filled with comments, photos, and notes from the crowd. "People want more," he said simply. "They want to know you, your story, and your cake." I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't intended to become anyone's symbol, anyone's story, or anyone's inspiration. I had only intended to bake a cake, to offer a small piece of happiness to a stranger. And yet, here I was, standing on the edge of something enormous, something I couldn't control, something that had grown far beyond my tiny kitchen, my quiet life, and my own understanding. I realized in that moment that life doesn't always reward planning, preparation, or caution. Sometimes it rewards courage, impulse, and the willingness to step into the unknown. As I walked back to my apartment, the city around me buzzing with distant voices and car horns, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. The cake was just the beginning. a small act that had unveiled a world of possibilities, connections, and challenges I hadn't anticipated. And I knew, deep down, that my life was no longer my own in the way it had been before. Something had been set in motion, something unpredictable, thrilling, and terrifying all at once. And the question that haunted me as I lay in bed that night, exhausted and exhilarated, was simple, yet profound. How far would this go, and who would I become in the process? The next morning felt different, like the world had shifted overnight and left me somewhere unfamiliar. My apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, now seemed smaller, almost confining, as if it couldn't contain the ripple I had set in motion. I rolled out of bed, my body still tired from the whirlwind of the day before, but my mind was racing, replaying every moment, the line of people, their faces full of anticipation, the man with the notebook, the way everyone seemed to hang on something I hadn't even realized I was offering. I had expected gratitude, yes, maybe a few smiles, but nothing like this. Nothing that made my pulse spike, and my hands tremble with a mixture of awe and fear. I went to the window and looked out at the street below, half expecting to see another line, another crowd, another wave of people waiting for me. But it was quiet. Almost eerily quiet. The calm was deceptive, though. I could feel the tension building, a slow, insistent pull that told me this wasn't over. It had only just begun. And as I sipped my coffee, trying to steady my racing thoughts, I realized that I had no idea what I was stepping into. By mid-morning, the first signs appeared. Messages, emails, and notifications flooded in again, this time with a different tone. People wanted to meet me, to talk about my cake, to hear my story. Some offered praise, others suggestions, and a few, unexpectedly, offered opportunities. One message was from a local news outlet, asking for an interview. Another was from a social media influencer, requesting a collaboration. The man from the library had left a note under my door, telling me to prepare for what's coming, and hinting that there were more people who wanted to see what I could do. I felt my stomach twist. I hadn't asked for any of this. I hadn't signed up for fame, for attention, for a world that suddenly seemed to orbit around a single act. And yet, there it was, undeniable and growing. I thought about the people in line, about their curiosity and excitement. I thought about how a simple last-minute decision had spiraled into something I couldn't have imagined. And I knew, deep down, that I couldn't stop it. Not without stepping away entirely, and even that felt impossible now. By afternoon, I decided to venture out, to see the effects of my cake beyond the immediate crowd. I walked to the nearby streets, past the cafes and shops, and noticed something remarkable. People were talking about me, about what had happened. "That's the girl who baked the cake," someone said as I passed. "Can you believe it?" whispered another. Strangers smiled, waved, even approached me to thank me personally. I felt a strange mix of pride and terror. The attention was intoxicating, but also overwhelming. Every step I took seemed to magnify the weight of expectation pressing down on me. Then came the unexpected twist. The man from the library called me later that afternoon, asking me to meet him. His voice was calm, measured, but there was an edge I couldn't ignore. "Alic," he said, "you need to see this. Come to the library after closing. There's something you should know." I felt my heart leap into my throat. My hands shook as I wrote down the time, the location. There was urgency in his tone, something hidden beneath the surface that made my pulse quicken. I couldn't ignore it, and yet fear coiled in my chest like a living thing, warning me that this encounter could change everything. When I arrived at the library that evening, The building loomed larger than I remembered, its high ceilings and endless shelves creating a sense of grandeur that made me feel small and insignificant. The man greeted me, his expression unreadable, and led me through winding corridors, past towering stacks of books that smelled of history, of knowledge, of secrets kept for centuries. My fingers brushed against the spines as we walked, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something was waiting, something beyond the cake, beyond the line of people, something I hadn't yet discovered. We stopped in front of a door I had never noticed before, its wood dark and polished, its handle cold under my fingers. He opened it slowly, revealing a room filled with papers, photographs, and objects I didn't recognize. "This," he said, gesturing to the collection, "is why your cake mattered more than you know." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. My heart pounded. I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the room, trying to understand what I was seeing. The photographs showed people I didn't know, faces full of hope, of despair, of longing. The papers detailed stories, events, small acts that had ripple effects far beyond what anyone could predict. And then I understood. My cake wasn't just a dessert, wasn't just a gesture of kindness. It had tapped into something larger, something invisible but powerful. It had become a symbol, a connection point, a catalyst for change in ways I couldn't yet fully comprehend. The man looked at me, his eyes intense. "You've started something, Alic. Something bigger than a line, bigger than a cake, bigger than you imagined. Are you ready for what comes next?" Fear and exhilaration collided inside me. I wanted to run, to hide, to escape the responsibility that had been thrust upon me. And yet, there was a part of me, a spark I hadn't felt in years, that knew I couldn't turn away. This was my moment, whether I was ready or not. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of possibility pressing down on me, shaping me, challenging me. As I left the library that night, the streets seemed different. The city lights shimmered with a new intensity, every face in the crowd a potential connection, every whisper a reminder of the impact I had made. I realized that life had shifted in a way I couldn't have planned. One small act, one impulsive decision, had opened doors, challenged boundaries, and changed the way I saw myself and the world. And the question that haunted me as I walked home, heart racing and mind spinning, was simple yet terrifying. How far was I willing to go, and what would I risk to see how far this could reach? By the time I returned to my apartment, exhausted and exhilarated, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Nothing would ever be the same. The cake had been just the beginning, a spark that had ignited a flame, and now it was up to me to decide whether to let it burn brightly or to let it fade. Every choice I made, every step I took, would ripple outward, shaping lives in ways I could barely imagine. And deep down, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, I felt a strange, undeniable thrill. I was alive in a way I hadn't been before, caught in the whirlwind of possibility, of connection, of the extraordinary unfolding from the ordinary. The next morning, I woke with a strange mix of excitement and dread. Sleep had been impossible, my mind spinning with questions, possibilities, and the weight of what I had seen in the library. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the faces in those photographs, read the stories on those papers, felt the invisible thread that connected my cake to something far bigger than myself. I dressed quickly, my hands trembling, and went to the kitchen. I couldn't eat. Nothing. Tasted right. Instead, I stared at the empty counter, imagining the cake I had made the day before, the line of people waiting, the expectation that had grown into something unmanageable overnight. By mid-morning, The notifications began again, faster and more urgent this time. Messages, emails, even calls from unknown numbers. People asking for more, wanting to know when I would bake again, what I would do next, how I could possibly have created something that mattered so much. Some messages were kind, full of encouragement, while others carried a tone I couldn't quite decipher, demanding, expectant, almost possessive. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. I hadn't signed up for this. I hadn't imagined that one cake could make me feel this exposed, this vulnerable. And yet, I knew there was no turning back. By noon, I received a call from the man at the library again. His voice was calm but urgent. "Alic, there's something you need to see. Come immediately. It can't wait." My heart raced as I grabbed my coat and left my apartment, the city streets now feeling alive in a way they never had before. People passed me on the sidewalks, unaware of the invisible current of tension and expectation that surrounded me. Every step felt heavy, each breath measured, as if I were walking toward a moment that could change everything. When I arrived at the library, the man was waiting, and he led me to a part of the building I hadn't seen before. It was a large, empty hall, the kind of space that could swallow a person whole. In the center, a table was set, covered with more cakes, dozens of them, each unique, each glowing under the soft light. My eyes widened. "These aren't mine," I whispered. He shook his head, a small, grim smile on his lips. "No, Alic, they're not, but they're waiting for you, and they're part of what's coming." Before I could ask a single question, he handed me a folder. Inside were letters, photographs, and notes from people who had been impacted by my first cake. Stories of gratitude, hope, and sometimes desperation. Each one carried a weight, a human story that demanded to be seen, acknowledged, and acted upon. I felt my chest tighten. The enormity of what had begun with a simple, last-minute gesture was hitting me with full force. And then he spoke, softly but firmly. "Alic, you've started something that can't be stopped. People are counting on you. Are you ready for what comes next?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to run, to hide in my apartment, to pretend none of this mattered. But deep down, I knew that running was impossible. I was already part of something bigger than myself, something that demanded courage, action, and resilience. And despite my fear, a spark of determination flickered inside me. I nodded slowly, my voice barely audible. "I'll do it." The next days were a whirlwind. I baked, planned, and prepared in ways I hadn't imagined possible. Each cake became more than a dessert. It became a message, a symbol of care, connection, and change. The line of people waiting grew longer, stretching around the block, full of anticipation, curiosity, and sometimes desperation. I saw faces that mirrored my own mix of excitement and fear, eyes shining with hope, mouths murmuring gratitude. Each interaction, each moment, deepened the responsibility pressing on my shoulders. And then came the unexpected. A journalist appeared, camera crew in tow, documenting the story of the girl who had baked a cake for a stranger and unintentionally created a phenomenon. Questions followed, cameras clicked, and suddenly my life felt exposed to the world. I had imagined attention, yes, but nothing like this. Every detail of my life, every choice I had made in the past weeks was now visible to everyone. I felt raw, vulnerable, and alive in a way I had never known. The man from the library appeared again, bringing with him a new folder. This one was heavier, filled with documents, letters, and photographs that traced a hidden network of people connected by acts of kindness, small gestures that had created ripples of change. "This is why your cake mattered," he said, eyes intense. "You've tapped into something extraordinary, but now you need to choose. Will you take it further or let it fade?" My hands shook as I touched the papers. I could feel the stories reaching out, demanding action, and I realized that this was more than baking. This was about impact, about connection, about courage. I spent hours reading, absorbing, and understanding the lives I had touched, the hope I had sparked. Fear battled with exhilaration, doubt with determination, as I recognized that one act could indeed change countless lives. But the weight of responsibility was immense. I felt a surge of emotion, pride, fear, anticipation, and an undeniable need to rise to the challenge. The line between ordinary and extraordinary had blurred, and I was standing squarely in that space, uncertain but resolute. That evening, I baked once more, carefully, deliberately, with a new sense of purpose. Each ingredient, each motion, each small detail mattered more than ever. The act became almost meditative, a ritual of intention, and as I finished, I felt the hum of possibility vibrating through me. This was more than a cake. It was a symbol, a message, a bridge connecting lives, hearts, and stories. And then, as I stepped back to admire my work, the realization hit me fully. I had changed. My world had shifted irrevocably. The fear, the exposure, the unexpected attention, all of it had transformed me. I was no longer just a girl who had baked a last-minute cake. I was Alic, someone capable of sparking change, someone who had unknowingly become part of something far greater than herself. And as the night settled, quiet and still, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. The choice I made next would define everything. My future, the lives I touched, and the power of a single act to ripple outward in ways I had never imagined. The next morning, I woke with a strange calm, the kind that comes after nights filled with fear, excitement, tea, and relentless questions. The city outside my window was stirring to life, but inside, I felt a quiet focus I hadn't known before. The line of people waiting for my cakes had grown longer overnight, stretching down the block like a river of hope and curiosity. I couldn't believe it. One small act, one simple decision to bake a cake for a stranger, had exploded into something so much bigger, so much more real than I could have ever imagined. My hands trembled slightly as I unpacked ingredients, measured, mixed, and kneaded with a precision that felt almost sacred. Each movement carried intention, each layer baked with the thought of the lives I was touching, the stories I was honoring. I paused for a moment, wiping flour from my hands, and realized that this wasn't just about cakes anymore. It was about connection, about human stories intertwining in ways that were invisible yet undeniable. Every letter, every note, every message I had received over the past days carried weight. People had shared pieces of their lives, loss, joy, hope, struggles, and dreams, and I had become part of that tapestry without even knowing it. The responsibility was immense, almost suffocating at times, but I also felt a surge of purpose I had never felt before. By midday, the first people began arriving, faces bright with anticipation, eyes shining with curiosity. They didn't just want a cake, they wanted the experience, the story, the connection. And I realized that what I was offering went far beyond a simple dessert. Each person represented a story waiting to be told, a life touched by kindness and intention. Some came silently, some with laughter, some with tears already forming. I watched them, listened to their whispers, their reactions, and felt my heart expand with every smile, every moment of genuine gratitude. Then the journalist returned. Her camera crew set up quickly, capturing the moments that had already begun to feel ordinary to me, but extraordinary to the world. She asked questions I hadn't anticipated: how I felt, why I baked, what this meant to me. My voice trembled at first, but soon words began to flow naturally, honest and heartfelt. I spoke of fear, of surprise, of the overwhelming reality of becoming part of something larger than myself. I spoke of the stories behind the cakes, of the invisible threads connecting strangers through a single act of kindness. Every word felt heavy with meaning, yet liberating. As the day continued, I noticed something remarkable. People began sharing their own stories with one another while waiting, forming connections I hadn't orchestrated but had somehow sparked. Strangers hugged, laughed, cried together, and I realized that the ripple effect of one small act had become a wave, carrying emotion, hope, and understanding far beyond anything I could have imagined. I felt my chest tighten with pride and awe. The cake had been the catalyst, but what mattered most was the human connection it had inspired. By evening, the line had finally thinned, and I stepped outside to breathe, the cool air brushing against my skin. The city lights reflected in my eyes as I watched the last of the crowd leave, smiles lingering on their faces, stories unfolding quietly in the night. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, mixed with exhaustion and humility. I had started this journey as a simple girl with a last-minute cake and no idea what would follow. Now, I understood the power of intention, of empathy, and of stepping into moments that scare and challenge you. The man from the library appeared again, this time with a gentle smile that held both pride and reassurance. "You've done more than you realize," he said softly. "This isn't the end, Alic. It's only the beginning." I nodded, feeling the weight of his words settle into me. He handed me another folder, lighter this time, filled with letters of gratitude, photographs, and messages from people whose lives had been changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Each story, each word, carried evidence of the unseen impact I had made. I realized that my choice to bake that cake had created more than attention. It had sparked hope, healed small cracks, and built bridges where none had existed. I thought back to the fear I had felt, the uncertainty that had gripped me in those first moments after the cake was delivered. I remembered the trembling hands, the racing heart, the doubt that I could ever make a difference. And now, I understood something crucial. Change doesn't always come from grand gestures. Sometimes it begins quietly, in small acts that seem insignificant, until the world bends around them and reveals their true power. I had been part of that quiet revolution, and I felt honored, humbled, and alive. As night fell, I sat alone for a moment, the city's hum beneath me, reflecting on everything that had happened. I had been scared, exhilarated, overwhelmed, and amazed, all at once. And yet, I knew that I was ready for what came next. I had learned that fear was a companion, not an enemy, that every choice carried power, and that human connection was the most profound gift I could ever witness or create. My heart swelled with gratitude for the journey, for the people I had touched, and for the lessons I had learned about courage, resilience, and the ripple effect of kindness. And then I asked myself, quietly, rhetorically, how many small acts, unnoticed and uncelebrated, wait to ripple outward, change lives, and create extraordinary moments? How many stories lie dormant, waiting for someone to step forward and make a difference, even if it seems impossible at first. I knew one thing for certain. This story, my story, was no longer just mine. It belonged to every person whose life had been touched, every smile sparked, every tear shed in hope and gratitude. And as I looked out into the quiet night, I realized that the power of one simple choice, a cake, an act of kindness, a moment of courage, could ripple across the world in ways I had only begun to imagine. I smiled, a quiet, reflective smile, feeling both humbled and empowered. The journey that had begun with a single last-minute cake had transformed me, my understanding of humanity, and my sense of purpose. I knew life would never be the same, and I didn't want it to be. The fear and excitement, the chaos and the joy had taught me that change was possible, even when it came from the most ordinary moments. And I promised myself, quietly but firmly, that I would continue to act, to create, to inspire, and to honor the unseen stories that connect us all. The night settled, soft and calm, and I finally understood. The cake had been just the beginning. Everything else, the connections, the hope, the ripple effect, was only possible because someone had dared to act, to reach beyond fear, and to offer something from the heart. And in that realization, I felt something unshakable. The world could be changed. One act, one choice, one story at a time.
I never thought a single morning could feel so heavy, so impossibly quiet, yet filled with a kind of electricity that made my heart race without any reason I could name. I'm Alic Rose, and this story, what happened to Mit's, still so vivid in my mind. I can feel the tension in my chest just remembering it. I woke up that day thinking it was just another ordinary day. The sun was barely peeking through the blinds, painting stripes across my small apartment floor. My cat, Milo, rubbed against my leg, purring softly, like he always did, completely unaware that the world outside was about to tilt in a way I could never have imagined. I remember sipping my coffee, my hands trembling not from the caffeine, but from a strange, unexplainable feeling, like the air itself was holding its breath. I had always been a planner, the kind of girl who likes order, predictability, the comfort of knowing what comes next. My friends called me careful, maybe even cautious, but I liked it. It made me feel safe. My job at the little bakery downtown wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. The smell of fresh bread, the feel of dough beneath my fingers, the quiet moments when the morning rush hadn't started yet, they grounded me. That morning, I packed my bag with some leftover ingredients, planning to make something small for a neighbor I had only ever waved to in passing. It wasn't a big deal, just a gesture, a tiny ripple in the vast river of life, but somehow, that choice would change everything. But walking down the street, the city felt different. I don't know how to explain it, but the usual hum of morning traffic, the familiar sounds of neighbors greeting each other, the birds chirping above it all felt heavier, like the world was leaning in, waiting. I hugged my bag closer, my stomach tight with nerves, though I wasn't sure why. The idea was simple. Bake a cake, bring it to someone who might need it, smile, and go home. That was it. But as soon as I stepped outside, I felt eyes on me. Not literally, not someone staring, but a weight, a presence that made me look over my shoulder, half expecting something, though I didn't know what. The streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so. I passed familiar shops, the corner cafe, the little flower stand where the elderly man always smiled at me. I kept telling myself, it's nothing, just nerves, just your imagination, Alic. But every step made my heart thud harder. And then, I saw her, or rather, him, the stranger waiting at the end of the block. I don't know why I noticed him so sharply, out of all the mundane things in the world, but I did. He was loading crates into a truck, his posture tired but purposeful, the kind of tired that comes from hard work, not laziness, the kind that makes you feel respect and curiosity all at once. I froze for a moment, gripping my bag of cake tightly. Just walk past, I whispered to myself, but my legs betrayed me. Somehow, I found myself moving closer, heart pounding, palms sweaty. mind racing through 1,000 questions I didn't even know how to ask. What if he didn't want it? What if he thought I was weird? What if I was making a fool of myself? But deeper than all that fear, there was this pull, a little voice insisting that I had to do it, that I couldn't turn back. When I finally stood in front of him, I could see the faintest hesitation in his eyes, not mistrust, exactly, but caution. The kind someone shows when they've been surprised too many times in life to believe that people just do kind things. I held out the cake, and for a brief second, I wondered if I should apologize for intruding, for bothering him, for existing in his moment. But then he smiled, small, almost imperceptible, but it felt like a crack in the tension. He accepted it, nodding quietly, and I thought, okay, that's it. Simple, kind, normal, accepted WASN. Single quotes T. By the time I turned away, heading back toward the streets I thought I knew, I noticed the first ripple. A woman passing by paused, her eyes wide, whispering to someone else. A man in the distance stopped mid-step, staring in our direction. I felt the weight of their gaze, and for the first time, I realized that my tiny act, so inconsequential in my mind, was being noticed. I tried to dismiss it, shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, but the feeling didn't leave. In fact, it grew, tightening around me like an invisible rope, pulling me forward into something I wasn't ready for. The rest of the morning was a blur. Phones appeared, strangers started whispering, lines began forming outside the bakery I hadn't even officially opened yet. People I didn't know, faces I'd never seen, all looking at me with the same mixture of hope, curiosity, and something else, a kind of judgment I couldn't quite place. And I realized then, as I held onto my bag and my racing heart, that nothing about this day was ordinary anymore. What I thought was a small, fleeting act of kindness had spiraled into a storm I couldn't control, and I didn't know it yet. But the next hours, the next moments, would challenge everything I thought I knew about myself, about people, and about the world. That morning marked the beginning of a chain of events so shocking, so surreal, that even now, I struggle to put it into words without my chest tightening. The people, the stares, the whispers, the sudden attention, they weren't just passing through. They were the first cracks of a reality that would soon sweep me off my feet, leaving me to face choices, fears, and truths I never thought I would. I didn't know it then, but I was about to learn, in the most unexpected and frightening way, that one small, simple gesture could set off a chain reaction, a story that would become bigger than me, more complicated than I could manage, and utterly unforgettable. And as I took that first step back down the street, heart pounding, bag in hand, I could only wonder what was coming next. I walked down the street, my steps hesitant, my bag feeling heavier than ever. The murmurs of the crowd still echoed in my mind, though I couldn't see most of them clearly. Something about the way people looked at me like I had done something remarkable or something wrong, I couldn't tell which, made my stomach twist. I tried to ignore it, tried to focus on the ordinary, the hum of the city, the smell of fresh bread from a corner bakery, the distant bark of a dog, but it was impossible. My heart raced too fast, my mind too alert. By the time I reached my usual cafe, I realized I wasn't alone in feeling this strange shift. People had started gathering, slowly at first, and then, all at once. Some were standing silently, just watching, eyes wide with curiosity. Others whispered to each other, pointing, nodding, murmuring words I couldn't catch. I felt like a character in someone else's story. The kind where the main character doesn't know they're being watched until it's too late to act normally. I gripped my bag tighter, feeling the weight of the cake like it was the weight of the world itself. The first message came just as I tried to settle at a small corner table. My phone buzzed insistently. It was from a neighbor who had seen me earlier with the stranger. "People are talking about you." Lines forming outside the bakery. "Are you okay?" I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. I didn't know what to say. I was terrified, not because anyone was threatening me, not yet, but because I couldn't understand how something so small, so ordinary, had suddenly captured so much attention. I looked out the window, and that's when I saw it. The first line. People, dozens of them now, stretching down the block, all waiting for me, waiting for a cake I had never intended to become famous for. My heart skipped, my throat tightened, and I realized that I was standing at the center of something far bigger than myself. I had no plan, no instructions, just the small hope that my gesture, my kindness, would bring a little happiness to someone. And yet, here I was, caught in a wave I had never anticipated. A man in a suit stepped forward, his expression unreadable. He asked politely if I had made the cake, and before I could answer, more people surrounded him, murmuring questions. Cameras appeared, phones raised like tiny spotlights, recording, documenting, capturing my face, my movements, my very existence. The intensity of their attention made my stomach churn. I wanted to run, to disappear, but my legs refused. It was as if the act of fleeing would betray something I hadn't even admitted to myself, that I was scared and exhilarated at the same time. By midday, the situation had escalated. People began speaking to me directly, asking why I had done it, who had inspired me, why I had chosen that stranger, that specific act. Some faces were hopeful, bright with gratitude. Others were suspicious, narrow-eyed, judging. I felt every emotion at once: fear, pride, shame, exhilaration, and in that moment, I realized that what I had thought was just a simple, fleeting gesture had become a reflection of something far deeper, something human, raw, and intensely real. The stranger from before, the one I had handed the cake to, approached me again. This time, his eyes carried a different weight, a mixture of surprise, recognition, and caution. You didn't have to do this," he said quietly, almost too quietly to be heard over the murmurs, but I heard it, every word slicing through the noise. "I wanted to," I said, my voice shaking, "because it felt right, because I couldn't not." He nodded slowly, as though understanding something that words could not explain. Yet even as he stood there, I could sense tension, unease. Not everyone in the crowd shared his quiet understanding. Some whispered harshly, judgment in their voices. Others murmured incredulously, questioning my motives. My heart pounded with an intensity I couldn't name. The weight of eyes, the collective expectation, and the uncertainty of what would happen next pressed down on me, suffocating and electrifying all at once. Then it happened. Someone reached for their phone and live-streamed the scene. Within moments, faces, whispers, and cameras multiplied. I became visible in a way I had never imagined, a center of attention I didn't want, yet couldn't escape. My mind spun. What had started as a small, private act had become public spectacle. Lines of strangers waiting, murmuring, watching, judging, hoping, all coalescing around me like an unstoppable force. I stepped back, my legs unsteady, realizing that the consequences of one tiny decision had created a storm I couldn't control. But then, in the chaos, I felt a strange steadiness in myself. Fear was there, yes, but alongside it was a courage I hadn't known I had. I was facing something enormous, something beyond me, yet I refused to shrink. I had chosen to act, and now I had to face the consequences, whatever they might be. And in that moment, as the sun climbed higher and shadows danced across the street, I understood. Life had just pulled me into a story far larger than I had ever anticipated. One small cake, one simple gesture, had opened a door into the unexpected. What came next, I could not have predicted, but deep down, somewhere under the fear and the tension, I felt a flicker of determination. I would not run. I would face this moment, whatever it brought, because I had no other choice. The line continued to grow. The murmurs continued to swell, and the world, my world, had shifted. I had taken a small step into the unknown, and now I was swept along in a current that would push me further than I could have imagined, testing every bit of courage, every bit of hope I had inside me. And in that uncertainty, that raw, terrifying, electric uncertainty, I knew one thing: I couldn't turn back now. By the afternoon, the street had transformed into something I could barely recognize. The line outside the bakery wasn't just a few curious neighbors anymore. It stretched down the block and around the corner. I could see their faces now, some eager, some skeptical, some judging, and some holding the faintest glimmer of hope. And all of them were waiting for me, a girl who had only wanted to do something small, something kind. My stomach twisted at the weight of it, a mixture of disbelief and fear. How had one simple act of baking a cake spiraled into this? The stranger from that morning, the one I had given the cake to, stood nearby, silent but watchful. His presence was grounding, almost protective, but I could see it in his eyes. He didn't know what to make of this either. He wasn't a hero or a celebrity. He was just a man caught in the ripple of my impulsive act, and yet, somehow, he became the anchor that kept me from completely falling apart under the growing attention. People started asking questions, their voices overlapping, chaotic. Why did you do this? Who inspired you? Is this for charity? The murmurs grew louder, and soon, some began recording everything. shouting for friends and family to come see. It felt like I was being pulled in 100 directions at once, my own voice lost among the chatter. My hands were clammy, my knees weak, and yet, even in the chaos, a strange determination bubbled inside me. I couldn't stop now. I couldn't walk away. That and then it happened, the first confrontation. A woman, sharp-eyed, probably in her late 30s, pushed through the crowd and stepped directly in front of me. "Are you serious?" she asked, her voice loud enough to carry across the street. "Do you even know what you're doing? People are watching you like you're some kind of miracle. But what if it's dangerous?" I wanted to tell her I didn't know, that I hadn't planned any of this, but my voice caught in my throat. I could only nod, feeling the weight of every eye on me. The stranger finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "She's doing this because it's the right thing," he said. His words weren't loud, but they carried an authority that silenced some of the chatter. I looked at him, startled, realizing I had been so absorbed in my own fear that I hadn't noticed the way people reacted to him. Some nodded subtly, respect in their expressions. Others muttered among themselves, still skeptical, still wary, and I felt a strange mix of gratitude and fear. Gratitude that someone believed in me. Fear that this belief might not be enough to hold back whatever was coming next. By late afternoon, the line had grown even longer. The murmurs had evolved into conversations, debates, and arguments. I felt like I was standing at the center of a storm, the calm I had felt earlier now completely gone. I realized then that this wasn't just about a cake anymore. It was about me, about my choices, about what I was willing to risk for a simple act of kindness, and the truth hit me like a punch to the chest. Some people weren't just curious or hopeful. They were watching to see if I would fail. The stranger stayed by my side, guiding me, keeping me steady, and yet even he looked tense. I caught glimpses of his jaw tightening, his eyes scanning the crowd, his fingers brushing against the edge of my bag, a silent reminder that I wasn't alone. And in that small, human touch, I felt a connection I couldn't explain. We were both caught in this chaos, and somehow, that made me feel a little braver, a little stronger than the moment I had feared arrived. A man from the crowd stepped forward, older, his eyes sharp, his tone accusatory. "You're causing chaos here," he said. "You have no right to do this. People are being distracted, children are crying, and what are you thinking?" His words cut through me. I could feel my confidence shaking, my courage faltering. The crowd shifted, some murmuring in agreement, others glaring at him, and I realized how fragile my position was. One wrong move, one misstep, and this entire moment could collapse. And yet, I couldn't back down. I took a deep breath, clenching my bag tightly, and spoke, my voice trembling but clear. "I'm doing this because it felt right, because someone needed this, and because kindness shouldn't be hidden. It doesn't matter who watches, who judges. What matters is that it's done." The stranger gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, but it was enough to remind me that I wasn't alone in my conviction. The crowd quieted, just enough for me to feel the impact of my own words, and then came the whispers, the first ripple of recognition, of understanding. A few people smiled, some lowered their cameras, and for a brief, fragile moment, I felt like I had a choice again, like I could breathe. But it was only a moment, because from the corner of my eye, I saw her, the woman the stranger had mentioned earlier. She wasn't part of the crowd. She wasn't smiling or whispering. She was watching, silent, calculating, and her gaze made my skin prickle. Something about her presence felt dangerous, like a warning I couldn't fully understand. And I realized with a shock that this moment the line, the attention, the chaos wasn't just about kindness anymore. It was about exposure, vulnerability, and maybe, just maybe, danger. The line continued to grow. The whispers evolved into conversations. The cameras multiplied, and I, Alic Rose, standing with trembling hands, a bag of cake in my arms, and the stranger by my side, realized that I was no longer just a girl doing a small act of kindness. I was at the center of something far bigger than I could have imagined, a storm I hadn't prepared for, and a story that was only beginning to reveal its depth, its darkness, and its truth. That as the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the street, I felt the weight of what was coming next. Every heartbeat felt louder than the last. Every glance from the crowd every whisper, every camera lens focused on me, was a reminder that I was part of a story that couldn't be undone. And I couldn't help but wonder, how far would this go? How much more would I have to face before the day ended? I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and in that moment, I promised silently, not to run, not to hide, not to let fear control me. Whatever happened next, I would face it, and little did I know, the next hours would push me further than I could have ever imagined, revealing secrets, tests, and truths that would change everything. By evening, the street had transformed completely. The line had stretched down multiple blocks now, people murmuring, cameras flashing, whispers traveling faster than I could process. I could barely believe what had happened. I had just baked a simple cake for a stranger, tiny act hand somehow. In a few hours, my quiet, ordinary life had exploded into chaos. Every face in that crowd seemed to carry a question, a judgment, a story of its own. I felt exposed, fragile, and yet a part of me was fiercely alive, as if every heartbeat screamed that I was finally seen. The stranger from that morning stayed by my side, quiet but vigilant, his presence grounding me. His calmness contrasted sharply with the swelling energy of the crowd. And then, as the last rays of sun cast a golden glow across the street, I noticed her, the woman, who had been watching silently from the corner. She stepped forward, her expression unreadable, and my stomach dropped. There was something about her gaze that felt dangerous, calculating, like she knew more than I could ever imagine. Before I could react, she approached, her voice soft but laced with a strange authority. "You shouldn't have done this," she said. "You don't understand what you've set in motion." My hands tightened around the bag of cake. I didn't mean any harm. I just wanted to help someone, I stammered. But she shook her head. "It's not just about helping. It's bigger. People are noticing. They're watching. And some of them, they will take advantage of this." I glanced at the stranger beside me, searching for reassurance. He gave me a small, almost imperceptible nod, the kind that said, "We'll face this together." And just like that, I realized I wasn't alone in this storm. There was someone who understood the weight of what I had unleashed. Someone who wasn't going to let me crumble under it. Then, the whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the crowd. Cameras raised higher, phones pointed directly at us, and I felt the intensity of their gaze pressing down on me, heavy and relentless. And just as panic began to creep into my chest, something remarkable happened. People started stepping forward, smiling, offering words of encouragement, cheering for what I had done. The atmosphere shifted, slowly at first, then with a growing momentum. I realized that my small act of kindness had sparked something bigger than me, a wave of hope, of human connection, of shared experience. But even in that wave of positivity, the woman from earlier remained a presence, watching, waiting. And then, as if on cue, she revealed the truth I hadn't yet seen. She introduced herself as the owner of a local charity that had been struggling to reach the people who needed help most. "Your cake," she said softly, "has reminded everyone that small acts matter, that generosity isn't invisible, but we need guidance, structure, or this goodwill could be lost, wasted." My heart skipped. The chaos, the attention, the scrutiny, it had all been a test of sorts. Not malicious, but a challenge to see whether kindness could survive the scrutiny of the world. I stepped forward, my voice trembling but firm. "I don't know if I'm the right person for this," I admitted. "I'm just me. I didn't plan any of this. I didn't want to be in the spotlight." She smiled, a warm, knowing smile that reached her eyes. "That's exactly why you are, Alic. Real kindness doesn't plan for recognition. It acts anyway, and the impact, well, that comes in ways we cannot always predict." At that moment, I felt a shift inside me. The fear, the uncertainty, the weight of the crowd, all of it melted slightly, replaced with a deep, grounding sense of purpose. This wasn't about fame or approval. It was about connection, about seeing the ripple effect of even the smallest gesture. The stranger at my side, who had been silent for so long, finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "You did this because it mattered. That's all that counts." The crowd, sensing the change, began to disperse slowly, some lingering to offer smiles or words of thanks. I felt relief wash over me, but also a strange melancholy. It had been overwhelming, exhausting, terrifying but transformative. I looked at the stranger once more, realizing that in his quiet way, He had guided me through the chaos without asking for anything in return, and I felt gratitude, deep and unshakable, for his presence, his patience, and his unwavering steadiness. By nightfall, the street was quiet again. The line was gone. The cameras and whispers had faded. I stood there, holding my bag, now empty, heart still racing, mind buzzing with everything that had unfolded. I realized, then, that life had changed irreversibly. One small act, a cake baked in the quiet of my apartment, had sent ripples across a world I thought I understood, revealing the power of kindness, courage, and human connection. And as I walked home that night, the stranger beside me, finally speaking my name for the first time, as more than a passerby, Alic, I understood something profound. That day, I hadn't just given a cake, I had given a piece of myself, unplanned, vulnerable, real, and in return, the world had responded, not perfectly, not without scrutiny, but with honesty, reflection, and hope. I smiled faintly to myself, feeling exhaustion and exhilaration intertwine. The fear, the chaos, the judgment, it would stay with me forever. But so would the courage, the sense of connection, and the reminder that even one person, doing one small thing, can change the story in ways they never imagined. And as I turned the corner toward my quiet apartment, I asked myself, softly, in the still night, how many times do we overlook the small gestures that can change everything? How often do we underestimate the power of a simple act, performed from the heart? And in that quiet, I understood, I would never forget that day. I would never forget how fragile life could be, how strong courage can feel, and how even the smallest act of kindness can ripple across the world in ways we could never anticipate. The next morning, I woke up to an emptiness that felt almost sacred. The street outside my apartment was quiet again, as if the previous day the chaos, the crowd, the endless lines of people had been a dream. I could still feel the echoes of it in my chest, the rapid heartbeat, the rush of adrenaline, the weight of every gaze that had fallen on me. But now, standing in the soft morning light, I realized that the storm had passed, leaving something far more profound in its wake. I poured myself a cup of coffee, trying to ground myself in the ordinary again. My hand still trembled slightly, my mind replaying every face, every whisper, every subtle smile from strangers who had shown me a kind of gratitude I had never experienced before. I realized that the cake, the small act I had thought was meaningless, had become a bridge between people I would never have met, strangers whose lives I had touched, even unknowingly, and in turn, their lives had touched me in ways I could not yet fully comprehend. The stranger, the one I had baked the cake for, arrived at my apartment later that morning. His presence was calm, steady, grounding. He smiled faintly, almost shyly, and said, "People are still talking about what happened yesterday. They're inspired, they want to help, to give back. And it started with you." I blinked, feeling both overwhelmed and humbled. It was impossible to imagine that something I had done on a whim, without planning, without expecting anything in return, could ignite so much change. I remembered the woman from the charity, the way she had revealed that my small act could have a lasting impact. She had taken the chaos and transformed it into purpose. And in that transformation, I found clarity. Life was fragile, unpredictable, sometimes frightening but also beautiful in ways that could not be measured. Sometimes, the smallest gestures had the power to ripple across the lives of countless others, touching hearts in ways that words alone could never capture. As we stood together, talking quietly about the previous day, I realized how much I had grown in just a few hours. Fear had been a constant companion, yes, but so had courage. Uncertainty had pushed me to confront myself, my choices, my intentions, and in the middle of the storm, I had discovered a resilience I didn't know I possessed. I had learned that doing the right thing simply because it felt right was enough, even when the world watched, judged, or questioned you. The line outside the bakery, the whispers, the cameras, the unexpected attention, all of it had been a test. Not a malicious one, not a punishment, but a reflection of life itself, unpredictable, challenging, full of moments that could either crush you or reveal the strength inside you. And I had chosen to stay, to face it, to embrace the fear instead of running from it. That choice had changed everything. As the day faded into evening, I walked outside once more, breathing in the crisp air. The city felt different now, alive with possibilities, full of hidden connections waiting to be discovered. And I understood that kindness, courage, and human connection were not abstract ideas, they were tangible. living forces that could shape reality in ways we often underestimated. One small act, done with intention and heart, could transform not only the life of another person but also your own. I thought about the stranger, who had become more than a passerby, more than a witness. He had been my anchor, my quiet strength, someone who reminded me that even when the world seemed overwhelming, there was always someone to walk with you, side by side, through the chaos. And in that companionship, I found hope, not the fleeting, fragile kind, but a deep, enduring hope that would carry me forward. Long after the cameras had stopped rolling, the crowds had dispersed, and the world had returned to its usual rhythm. Sitting quietly on my balcony that evening, I reflected on the journey from fear to courage, from uncertainty to clarity. I realized that life wasn't about grand gestures or perfection. It was about showing up, even when you weren't sure of the outcome, even when the consequences were unknown. It was about small acts of bravery, small moments of generosity, and the courage to stand in the face of the unexpected. And in that quiet reflection, I whispered to myself, almost as a promise, I will not forget this. I will carry the lessons, the fear, the courage, and the hope with me, wherever life leads. And maybe, just maybe, I will inspire someone else to do the same, to act with heart, even when it feels impossible, because the ripple of a single choice can reach farther than we ever imagined. So, here I am, Alic Rose, a girl who baked a cake for a stranger, forever changed by a moment I never saw coming. A girl who discovered that even the smallest gesture, done with a pure heart, can turn the ordinary into something extraordinary. And I ask you, whoever is listening, how far would you go for kindness? How brave could you be if you let your heart guide you? The world is full of unseen moments, waiting for someone to act. Will you be that someone?
Think about it. Could this happen to you? Some stories aren't just heard, they're felt. Behind every truth, there's a hidden fear. This story won't just shake your mind, it'll haunt your soul. Who could imagine the truth would be this terrifying? The story ends, but the questions stay alive.